Donald Trump. How was he?
It was a really good meeting. We had dinner together.
Did you have a burger? Or steak? Doesn't he have steak?
He didn't have
meal?
steak on that occasion. He had chicken.
Breaking Donald Trump just dropped a political bombshell that's shaking the foundations of British power. In a searing attack, Trump called out Prime Minister Keir Starmer by name, blasting him for betraying Britain's own people while bowing to global elites. But the real shock came moments later, when King Charles himself made a public move that stunned the entire country. This isn't just a feud between world leaders. This is a full-blown crisis tearing through Downing Street, threatening to collapse the UK government from the inside. Protests are exploding. MPs are turning on each other, and the British public is demanding answers. What's unfolding right now is unlike anything seen in British politics in decades, and it's happening live. Donald Trump doesn't make subtle moves, and this time, he didn't hold back. In a fiery speech delivered to a packed rally in Pennsylvania, Trump launched into an unscripted tirade that sent shockwaves all the way across the Atlantic. With the world watching, he accused Prime Minister Keir Starmer of selling out the British people, calling him a puppet of unelected bureaucrats and global censors. But this wasn't just political theatre, this was a coordinated strike. An open accusation that Starmer's government is betraying the very principles that define a free society. Trump's words echoed with force. Britain used to be the land of Churchill and courage. Now it's the land of silence and censorship. The message was clear. Starmer is eroding liberty and the world is paying attention. But it didn't stop there. Trump then tied Starmer's leadership to Britain's spiralling migrant crisis, referencing recent reports of lavish spending on housing illegal migrants, while British citizens, including war veterans, remain homeless and forgotten. He declared that the British government is funding luxury for lawbreakers while their own heroes sleep in the coal. The crowd erupted. Within minutes, clips of the speech flooded British social media. Hashtags like Starmer betrayed Britain and veterans before migrants trended instantly, igniting a political firestorm that even the mainstream media couldn't ignore. Inside 10 Downing Street, panic set in fast. Starmer's aides were caught completely off guard. They scrambled to prepare statements, but the damage had already been done. By morning, every major British newspaper led with Trump's speech, and the backlash was spreading. Senior ministers reportedly called emergency meetings. One anonymous cabinet source described the mood as total chaos. According to insiders, several MPs warned that the speech had lit the match for public outrage already simmering over government spending, rising costs of living and collapsing public trust. And that's when the second blow landed, because Trump's warning wasn't just aimed at Starmer. It was a signal to American allies, investors, and tech leaders. Hours after the speech, multiple US-based companies began reviewing their UK operations. A top Silicon Valley CEO privately told reporters, "We don't want to do business in a country that punishes free speech." Suddenly, Britain's reputation as a tech hub and economic safe zone was under direct threat. Millions in potential investment began vanishing. Sterling dropped. Markets trembled. This wasn't just a verbal feud anymore, it was becoming an economic war. The political response in Westminster was nothing short of explosive. Conservative MPs immediately seized the moment, demanding Starmer clarify his government's position on digital censorship and migrant spending. Tory leader candidates began sharpening their knives. Nigel Farage called Trump's speech a wake-up call to the British establishment and doubled down on Reform UK's Veterans First campaign, which began attracting thousands of new supporters overnight. In Labour's own ranks, dissent grew louder. Several backbenchers began drafting letters demanding a formal review of migrant housing policies and free speech regulations. Some even whispered the unthinkable, that Starmer might not survive the year. But then, in a moment no one saw coming, Buckingham Palace made its move. A press release was quietly issued by royal aides announcing that King Charles would be attending a special remembrance event for British veterans, one organised with virtually no input from the government. The palace emphasised the King's personal commitment to those who have sacrificed for the nation and noted that he had undertaken private efforts to support housing for former service members. No political commentary, no names mentioned. But the implication was clear. The king was choosing a side, and it wasn't Starmer's. By the time King Charles stepped on stage that evening, the entire country was watching. His speech was short, but its message hit like a thunderclap. A nation is judged not by the wealth of its rulers, but by how it treats its defenders, he said. And then, locking eyes with the cameras, he added, "We must never place comfort for strangers above care for our own." The room fell silent. The message wasn't lost on anyone. And just like that, Britain's monarch had done what no king had done in decades. Spoken words that directly undercut the moral credibility of his own prime minister. It was more than a statement. It was a royal rebuke. The last time a monarch hinted at disapproval of a sitting PM, it triggered a constitutional crisis. Now, with the world watching and chaos rising, King Charles had reignited that possibility. The fallout was instant. Veteran organisations issued public statements thanking the king and echoing his words. Social media exploded with calls for Parliament to act. Even normally loyal Labour MPs began to distance themselves from Starmer's agenda, as one observer noted. When the king and Trump are on the same side, something big is breaking. The morning after King Charles's bold statement, Britain awoke to a political battlefield. The headlines screamed of betrayal, division and collapse. King defies PM, read one. Trump and Charles united and Starmer cornered, screamed another. But the real explosion wasn't in the papers, it was on the streets. What began as scattered discontent suddenly erupted into a nationwide movement. Veterans, families, pensioners, working class citizens, ordinary people who had quietly endured years of broken promises now stood shoulder to shoulder demanding answers. The chant rang out through cities like thunder, "Homes for heroes, not handouts for illegals." In London, a protest outside Parliament swelled beyond expectations. Police were caught unprepared as thousands poured into Westminster, waving British flags and holding up pictures of war veterans sleeping rough. Some wore their old uniforms. Others carried signs quoting Trump's speech or the King's chilling words. Many simply held cardboard signs with one word, betrayed. It wasn't just a demonstration, it was a reckoning. The images from Westminster were devastating. One clip showed a man in a wheelchair, his leg lost to an IED in Helmand Province, weeping beside a picture of his squad. Another showed a young child holding her father's medals with a sign that read, "He fought for Britain. Britain forgot him." These moments went viral within minutes. Millions of views, tens of millions of engagements, and all of it pouring more fuel on the fire engulfing Starmer's government. Inside the House of Commons, the atmosphere had turned toxic. What was once a secure Labour majority now felt like a house of cards. Ministers turned on each other behind closed doors. Whips could barely maintain party discipline. Several backbench Labour MPs demanded an emergency leadership meeting, warning that if Starmer refused, they'd go public with their dissent. One unnamed MP told a political reporter, "We're bleeding support. We're being tied to a dead horse." The Prime Minister has become a liability, and the real blow came from within Starmer's own cabinet. Leaks revealed that two senior ministers had privately urged him to walk back the migrant hotel policy, warning that public anger was growing out of control. But Starmer, reportedly furious and defensive, dismissed their concerns. "We're not taking policy advice from Donald Trump or the monarchy," he allegedly snapped. That one line, once leaked to the press, triggered a fresh wave of backlash. "Not even the king?" asked a stunned news anchor on live TV. The public outrage multiplied. Meanwhile, international pressure intensified. American investors began publicly pulling out of British ventures. One major cloud services firm announced it was halting all expansion plans in the UK, citing increasingly hostile regulatory conditions and lack of digital freedom. The pound dipped again. UK tech sector leaders begged the government for clarity. But none came. In Brussels, EU diplomats began whispering that Britain's global credibility was unravelling. In Ottawa, an advisor to the Canadian Prime Minister warned that London looks less stable by the day. The chaos had crossed borders. As political shockwaves spread, Keir Starmer attempted damage control. He called an emergency press conference hoping to seize back the narrative. But what followed was an unmitigated disaster. Visibly shaken, speaking from behind a podium flanked by generic slogans, Starmer tried to defend his migrant policies as balanced and compassionate. But journalists weren't buying it. One after another, they hammered him with questions about the veterans crisis, about the King's remarks, about Trump's warnings, about censorship, about collapsing investor confidence. Starmer dodged, deflected, read from prepared notes. Then came the killer question. Prime Minister, are you saying King Charles is wrong? Starmer froze. A long pause. Cameras clicked. His mouth opened, then closed. Finally, he muttered, "We have different responsibilities." The damage was done. That one line became the headline across every channel. Starmer refuses to defend the king. The nation was stunned, a prime minister unwilling or unable to align himself with his own monarch during a moral crisis. For many voters, it was the final straw. Across the country, polling shifted overnight. Labour's lead evaporated. In traditionally safe constituencies, voters abandoned the party in droves. Reform UK surged ahead in rural areas and working-class towns. The Conservatives, sensing an opportunity, launched a full frontal attack in Parliament, calling for an independent inquiry into migrant housing expenditure. Several Labour MPs refused to vote with their own party. Whispers of a no-confidence motion grew louder by the hour. But beyond Parliament, something even more powerful was building, a moral uprising. Grassroots groups exploded in size. Veterans Before Migrants passed 750,000 members. Local communities organised fundraising campaigns for homeless ex-servicemen, offering shelter and meals, something the government had failed to do. Viral campaigns flooded every social platform with split-screen images, five-star hotel buffets on one side, frostbitten war heroes on the other. The contrast was undeniable, the outrage unstoppable. And through it all, Trump kept tweeting. One message read simply, "If Britain won't take care of its heroes, America will." It was shared over 30 million times in 12 hours. Another, "The king sees it, though the people see it, only Starmer doesn't." The words burned through British politics like wildfire. As the tremors from Trump's warning and King Charles's quiet rebellion continued to shake the political landscape, something darker began to unfold. The inner circle around Keir Starmer was no longer just rattled, it was crumbling. Trusted advisors began leaking private conversations, cabinet ministers started calculating their exit strategies, and the once solid Labour machine showed visible cracks. What was once whispered in corners now echoed in headlines, "Starmer is finished." It began with a shock resignation. Minister of Veterans Affairs Caroline Rhodes stepped down live on air during a BC interview with tears in her eyes and fury in her voice. She declared, "I cannot, in good conscience, remain part of a government that neglects those who sacrificed everything for this country." The nation was stunned. Even more devastating was the revelation that Rhodes had privately pleaded with Starmer for months to increase funding for homeless veterans and had been ignored. Her resignation letter, leaked hours later, accused Starmer of prioritising optics over honour and warned that history will not forget this betrayal. The political fallout was immediate. 2 more junior ministers resigned before the day was over. Whispers began swirling about letters being submitted to the Parliamentary Labour Party Leadership Committee, early signs of a potential challenge to Starmer's leadership. Meanwhile, dozens of backbench MPs reportedly held private meetings with opposition parties, weighing their options in case of an early leadership vote. One insider described it bluntly. "The ship is taking on water. Everyone's looking for a lifeboat." But it wasn't just politicians who were turning. Civil servants, normally silent and unseen, began leaking internal documents to the press. One particularly damning report showed that the Home Office had issued memos encouraging positive press for the migrant hotel programme while deliberately downplaying the rising number of veterans sleeping rough. Another revealed that luxury hotel contracts worth hundreds of millions were handed out without competitive bidding, raising serious concerns about corruption and cronyism. The media pounced. Front pages were plastered with words like scandal, waste, and disgrace. Then came the voice of the armed forces. A retired general, Sir Adrian Lawton, took to the airwaves with a furious statement. Britain has failed its warriors, he declared. The politicians sip wine in Whitehall, while the men who bled for them rot in the streets. His words struck a nerve, especially among military families and veterans groups. Donations to emergency veteran shelters surged overnight. Civil society was stepping in where the government had failed and making it clear that it no longer trusted those in charge. Meanwhile, the King's quiet defiance continued to gather strength. Though Buckingham Palace made no further statements, reports emerged that Charles had personally met with leaders of several veterans' charities. One insider claimed the King asked, "What more can I do?" The tabloids hailed him as the people's king. A monarch willing to act where elected leaders would not. In a stunning twist of fate, the British crown, once seen as symbolic and distant, was now at the centre of a moral uprising. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Starmer launched what his team called a reset tour, visiting community centres and hosting town halls to explain his government's position. But the public wasn't buying it. At one town hall in Sheffield, a war widow stood up and confronted the Prime Minister directly. Her husband, a sergeant killed in Helmand, had been posthumously awarded the Queen's Commendation for bravery. Yet she revealed that she and her children were now on a housing waiting list behind recent migrant arrivals. Her voice broke as she asked, "Is that what he died for?" Starmer had no answer. Videos of the exchange went viral within minutes. News anchors struggled to maintain composure as they replayed the footage. Public opinion turned even more sharply. Polls showed a 17-point collapse in Labour support. Among military families, Reform UK surged again, now neck and neck with Labour in multiple northern constituencies. Even traditional Labour voters began saying on camera that they felt ashamed to be associated with the party. The digital world was no kinder. Social media platforms overflowed with anger. AI-generated split screens showed soldiers in trenches beside images of five-star hotel pools. Users created mock campaign posters with the slogan, "Starmer's Britain, heroes freeze, strangers feast." Celebrities, influencers, and even apolitical public figures joined the movement, urging followers to stand with veterans. And in perhaps the most unexpected moment of the week, a viral clip showed a group of schoolchildren at an assembly chanting "Veterans First" while holding handmade signs. The movement had become unstoppable, no longer confined to parliament or protests. It had entered the cultural bloodstream of the country. At this point, even Starmer's closest allies began pulling away. Chancellor of the Exchequer, Dominic Hughes, reportedly told party insiders he would refuse to appear alongside Starmer at any future public events. Home Secretary Elaine Gardner refused to answer questions about migrant spending during an appearance on Sky News. Citing ongoing investigations, rumours swirled that Gardner was preparing her own leadership bid just in case. Back in the Commons, opposition leader Richard Price seized the moment. Delivering a blistering speech, he declared, "Never before in modern Britain have we seen such a collapse of leadership. Such a betrayal of duty, such a shameful abandonment of those who served." He then tabled a formal motion calling for a full parliamentary inquiry into the Prime Minister's migrant spending policies and veteran support failures. The chamber erupted. The Speaker struggled to restore order, but the message was clear. This was no longer a policy dispute. It was a national crisis. And all the while, Trump continued to fan the flames. In a televised interview, he reiterated his stance. Britain's government is crumbling because they forgot their people. And when a king has to do a prime minister's job, it's already over. The quote was broadcast across the UK, replayed endlessly, etched into the minds of millions. With his authority shattered, support collapsing and allies fleeing, Keir Starmer faced the unthinkable. Total political implosion. Late last night, senior Labour MPs met in secret to discuss triggering a leadership vote. At the same time, mass protests surged again outside Parliament, this time joined by active duty soldiers in silent defiance. Then came the final blow, a letter from the King, privately sent but publicly leaked, expressing deep concern over the government's treatment of veterans. The message was clear. The monarch had spoken, the people had risen, and Starmer's days were now numbered. Britain is witnessing a political downfall that will echo for generations.